The snow fell in soft, heavy flakes, blanketing the quiet streets of Maplewood, Ohio. It was late, nearly midnight, and the neon glow of a 24-hour diner flickered against the frosted windows of Main Street. Richard Caldwell, bundled in a tailored wool coat, stood frozen on the sidewalk, his polished shoes sinking into the slush. His hands fumbled in his pockets, then his briefcase, his face tightening with a sudden sickening realization. His wallet, black leather, monogrammed, stuffed with cash and cards, was gone, somewhere between the corporate high-rise in Cleveland and this sleepy town where he'd stopped for coffee. It had slipped away. He scanned the empty street, heart pounding, as the snow buried any trace of hope. $1,000 in cash, his driver's license, his platinum Amex, all vanished into the night. Who loses their entire life in a wallet and doesn't even notice? Richard wasn't used to feeling helpless. At 62, he'd built Caldwell Enterprises from a single hardware store into a chain of 47 locations across the Midwest. He was the man who had answers, who made decisions, who never faltered. But now, standing in the cold, he felt small, exposed, like a boy lost in a storm. The diner's neon sign buzzed faintly, and he pushed through the glass door, the bell jingling above him. The warmth hit his face, carrying the scent of burnt coffee and frying bacon. A waitress, her graying hair pulled into a loose bun, glanced up from wiping the counter. "You okay, Han?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. Richard didn't answer. He just sank into a booth, staring at the table, his mind racing. He'd been distracted all day, meetings, emails, the weight of a boardroom vote looming tomorrow. Had he left it at the gas station? The toll booth? He pressed his fingers to his temples, trying to retrace his steps. Outside, the snow kept falling, and a figure shuffled past the diner's windows. An older man, maybe in his late 60s, moved slowly, his tattered coat patched with duct tape, his beard flecked with gray and frost. He carried a small canvas bag, slung over one shoulder, and his boots left uneven tracks in the snow. His name was Amos, though Richard didn't know that yet. Amos had been a fixture in Maplewood for years, sleeping under the bridge near the old mill, picking up odd jobs when he could. Most folks didn't notice him anymore, but Amos noticed everything. Like the black leather wallet he'd found an hour ago, half buried in a snowbank near the gas station on Route 42. He'd picked it up, dusted it off, and saw the initials RC embossed on the front. It was heavy, important. Someone's life was inside. Amos pushed into the diner, the bell jingling again. Richard didn't look up, but the waitress, Marla, gave Amos a warm nod. "Evening, Amos. Coffee?" she asked, already reaching for a mug. Amos shook his head, his voice low and gravelly. "Not tonight, Marla. Found something. Need to do right by it." He reached into his bag and pulled out the wallet, holding it like it was fragile, like it might break if he gripped it too hard. Marla's eyes widened. "Whose is that?" she asked, leaning closer. Amos shrugged. "Fella named Richard Caldwell, judging by the license. Figure he's missing it." Marla glanced at Richard, still hunched in the booth, and her face softened with understanding. She walked over, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum, and slid into the booth across from him. "Sir? You Richard Caldwell?" she asked gently. Richard's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "Yeah, why?" Marla tilted her head toward Amos, who stood by the counter, clutching the wallet. "That man over there, he's got something of yours." Richard's gaze darted to Amos, taking in the worn coat, the weathered face, the hands roughened by years of cold and struggle. He stood, cautious, and approached the counter. Amos held out the wallet, his eyes steady but kind. "Found it by the gas station. Didn't open it, except to check the name. Figured you'd want it back." Richard took the wallet, his fingers trembling slightly as he flipped it open. Everything was there: cash, cards, even the faded photo of his late wife Ellen tucked in the back. He looked at Amos, then back at the wallet, his throat tightening. You could have kept this. Nobody would have known." Amos shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Wouldn't sit right with me. Ain't mine to keep." Richard stared, his mind grappling with the simplicity of it. Why would a stranger, with nothing to his name, care enough to return a fortune? The diner was quiet, save for the hum of the coffee maker and the soft patter of snow against the windows. Richard slid into a booth, gesturing for Amos to join him. "Let me buy you a coffee at least," he said, his voice softer now, less guarded. Amos hesitated, then sat, his bag resting at his feet. Marla brought 2 steaming mugs, setting them down with a knowing smile. "On the house," she said, winking at Amos before heading back to the counter. The 2 men sat in silence for a moment, the warmth of the coffee seeping into their hands. Richard studied Amos, trying to make sense of him. "You live around here?" he asked finally. Amos nodded, sipping his coffee. "Under the bridge, mostly. Been in Maplewood. Oh, 10 years now." Richard frowned, the weight of that sinking in. 10 years? That's a long time to be out there. Amos chuckled, a low, raspy sound. "Ain't so bad. Folks like Marla look out for me, and I got my routines. Keeps me grounded." They talked, haltingly at first. Richard asked about Amos's life, careful not to pry too deep. Amos shared fragments of a job lost in the recession, a family scattered by time and distance, a life pieced together from small kindnesses. Richard listened, his usual sharpness softening. He told Amos about his own life, surprising himself with the words that spilled out. The hardware stores, the late nights, the way success had filled his days but left his heart empty since Ellen passed 5 years ago. "I keep busy," Richard said, staring into his coffee. "But sometimes it feels like I'm just running from the quiet." Amos nodded, his eyes distant but understanding. "Quiet's the hardest part, but sometimes that's where you find what matters." Richard looked at him, struck by the weight of those words. "You ever feel like kindness finds you when you need it most?" Over the next few weeks, Richard found himself returning to Maplewood. He told himself it was for business of potential new store location, but deep down, he knew it was Amos. They'd meet at the diner, sharing coffee and stories. Amos had a way of listening, really listening, that made Richard feel seen in a way he hadn't in years. One evening, as the snow fell outside, Richard noticed Amos's coat, the duct tape peeling, the fabric thin against the cold. "You need a new coat," Richard said, his tone matter-of-fact. Amos waved him off. "This one's fine. Been through worse." But the next day, Richard showed up with a navy parka, warm and sturdy, from the thrift store on Main Street. He slid it across the table, avoiding Amos's eyes. "Just take it. I'm tired of looking at that duct tape." Amos stared at the coat, then at Richard, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded, slipping it on. "Fits good," he said quietly, his voice thick. Richard shrugged, but his chest felt warm, like a fire kindled after years of ash. When did a small gesture start to mean so much? Winter deepened, and their meetings became a routine. Richard brought Amos gloves, then a thermos for coffee. Amos shared stories of Maplewood's past the old mill, the church bazaars, the way the town came together after the '98 flood. One night, over slices of Marla's pecan pie, Amos pulled a small creased photo from his bag. It was a young girl, maybe 10, with Amos's eyes. "My daughter Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Haven't seen her in 20 years maybe. She's out west now, got a family of her own." Richard leaned closer, studying the photo. "You ever try to reach her?" Amos shook his head, his fingers tracing the photo's edge. "Lost touch after. Well, after things fell apart. Don't even know where to start." Richard sat back, his mind turning. He'd spent decades solving problems, logistics, budgets, contracts. But this felt different, bigger. Could a single act, one small push, change the course of a life? The next week, Richard didn't show up at the diner. Amos sat in their usual booth, sipping coffee, his new coat draped over the seat. Marla noticed his quiet, the way his eyes kept drifting to the door. "He'll be back," she said, refilling his mug. But Amos just nodded, his face unreadable. 3 days later, Richard walked in, his eyes bright with something new. He slid into the booth, a manila envelope in his hand. "I did some digging," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "Found your daughter, Sarah. She's in Portland, married, 2 kids. I got her address and a phone number." Amos froze, his coffee mug halfway to his lips. The envelope sat between them, heavy with possibility. Why'd you do that? Amos asked, his voice cracking. Richard leaned forward, his own voice breaking. Because you gave me back my wallet, but more than that, you gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost, a reason to care. Amos's eyes glistened, and for a moment, neither man spoke. The diner hummed around them, the clink of dishes, the murmur of voices, but they were in their own world, bound by something unspoken. Could this moment, this one actor write everything they believed about life and loss? Amos took the envelope, his hands trembling. He didn't open it, not yet, but he looked at Richard, his voice barely audible. "Thank you." Richard nodded, his throat tight. They sat there, sipping coffee, the snow falling outside, the world feeling a little less heavy. Over the next few weeks, Amos started writing letters slow, careful words to a daughter he hadn't seen in decades. Richard helped, suggesting phrases, mailing them from his office. One evening, Amos showed up at the diner with a reply letter from Sarah, her handwriting neat and warm, inviting him to visit. Amos's hands shook as he read it aloud, his voice breaking on her name. Richard listened, his heart full, the ache of his own loneliness softer now, like a bruise fading. Spring came to Maplewood, the snow melting into green. Amos moved into a small apartment above the thrift store, a job sweeping floors at the church, giving him just enough to get by. Richard visited often, their booth at the diner a constant. One Sunday, as they shared coffee, Amos handed Richard a photo him with Sarah, her husband, and 2 kids, all smiling in a Portland park. "Wouldn't have this without you," Amos said, his eyes steady. Richard shook his head, a faint smile breaking through. "You started it. That wallet, it was just the beginning." They laughed, the sound warm, like the first day of spring. What if your smallest kindness became someone else's reason to keep going? Has kindness ever changed your life? Tell us in the comments your story might inspire our next video. This story is a work of fiction or dramatized for entertainment purposes. While it may be inspired by real human emotions and events, all characters, names, and situations are either entirely fictional or modified for storytelling. This content fully complies with YouTube's community guidelines and is intended to inspire, not mislead.